a little awkward today. I don't really have a head. I got my headphones.
Right. Let me get rid of my headphones so so solidarity.
No, you're all good. Solidarity,
brother.
bro. Yeah, so today's going to be an interesting episode with everything that's going on in the Middle East, aka Palestine. We're going to be talking about that whole conflict and maybe giving you guys.
Wait, I thought we were just talking about the Major League Baseball playoffs. This whole episode.
I studied for the wrong thing, man.
Yeah, I'm ready. I came ready. Diamondbacks 3-0 against the Dodgers. They move on to face the winner of Braves Phillies. Are you a baseball fan?
No,
Okay.
I know nothing.
Right. That was my joke I prepared for all day because the MLB is big news for me. I'm glad I could lay that out there. Before we get too far ahead, yes. 100%. Israel-Palestine is kind of the news of the week. Obviously, it's pretty much all anybody's talking about on social media. It's all anybody's talking about anywhere. But I'm going to start a new thing where as I'm editing these, I'm kind of just noticing as new stories come out and I'm staying kind of following certain stories, and as I'm editing or as I'm re-listening or just thinking about something I said from a previous episode, if I get something wrong, I'll just do retractions up top at the beginning of the next episode. So a couple of retractions from last episode.
Okay.
One, I mentioned that the voters that or the far right votes to remove McCarthy as speaker. I mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert.
Yeah.
They did not, in fact, vote to remove him. They voted to keep him. Yeah. They were not part of Gates's whatever. So that's one retraction. I think I implied that they had voted to oust McCarthy alongside Gates, but actually no, they were steadfast. And then I also mentioned that it was a WGA that didn't qualify for health insurance because of their thing. That was actually a SAG stat, and it was 14%. Only 14% of actors qualify for the health insurance, and it's actually, I think I said 45,000. It's actually 26,000 a year.
God.
86% of actors do not make more than 26,000 a year, which is like,
good God,
like that's so far below minimum wage. It's insane, and that's in Los Angeles,
in LA, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So it's actually so much worse than I thought.
Oh
yeah.
God.
So anyway, a couple quick retractions up top.
I'm sure a lot of it is because they're like side gigs. A lot of people do side gigs.
Yeah, I mean, so
they're
like,
not full-time actors, but still 14%.
I forget what the requirements to get a SAG card was, but I mean, these are like full-time servers or full-time whatever, and then they'll do a couple extra roles here and there, and they'll have their SAG union card because they've qualified, and so they're trying to make it in the acting world, but they don't. But that mean, what we know from being a server or working in whatever low-wage industries, you're also not getting benefits from those industries. So it's it's not like they have some full-time gig where they're like doing fine elsewhere. They're also struggling on their other gigs.
They probably have multiple part-time gigs.
Yeah, so anyway, that's just going to be a theme I'm going to do. I'm just going to bring retractions of anything we got wrong for the previous week.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, information. There's so much information out there that you're bound to get things mixed up, especially when, SAG and the writers at the same time were having a strike. So a lot of information coming at the same time.
Yeah.
You're bound to make some sort of like mix and match.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's not a bad idea. I like that because we're trying to stay
honest,
burdened to the facts and not just out of bias.
I mean, that's the big problem with being on the left, or at least like anytime you're in a conversation or conversing or debating somebody who's on the right, is like you're beholden to a certain parameters of truth and facts and like logic and fact checking, and they aren't. And so like by default, you're coming in on the back foot with any argument, with any debate, with any kind of conversation you have with somebody who's just they're meeting with you in bad faith from the get-go. So it's always so frustrating because I'll have to, like, when I'm in, like, back in the day, I used to get in these Facebook arguments with, like, people on the right. And, like, it would take me a day to craft a response because I'd have to go do a bunch of reading and research to come back.
Because you actually want to give them real facts.
Yeah, and then they would immediately reply in 30 seconds. And it looks like you lose a debate. And it's just so frustrating.
That's why debates
that.
are a bunch of garbage, man.
Yeah,
debates are just how well do you speak? Do you stutter? At the same time, it's like, hey, I have this fact, and I'm pointing it out to you and be like, where'd you get that information from? It's like, okay, well, let me pull up my entire encyclopedia in my brain and just list through all the articles that I've memorized and where they're from. And it's like, no, you hear a fact, you know it's from a good source, and you just forget the source.
Yeah. So I just also, before we get into the deeper meat of today's topic, I had a couple updates. This is just kind of a running theme. I think every episode we've had just congressional disarray updates or congressional disarray news. A lot of big news. Santos of New York was indicted. on like 23 counts of different fraud, corruption, using donors to pay for his own things. I don't know the details. We're not going to get too much into it.
Yeah.
But that's George. Was it George Santos or Matt? No, what's it? Yeah,
George. I think
it's George Santos. Yeah, the guy who's like a serial, like pathological liar who's never like told the truth
that
about
he's,
anything.
He's Jewish, but he's not Jewish.
He's just,
but
that
he's
guy's
gay,
like
but he not might be gay.
The weirdest thing ever. Also, and so that's a Republican. But hey, not to be left out, Bob Menendez, Senator Bob Menendez, indicted. This one's weird.
Spy.
As an Egyptian spy, so that's unfolding. He's definitely taken a lot of bribes in terms of, I think, material gifts, cash, and gold bars from the Egyptian government, or from like from American agents, like representing Egyptian agents. I'm gonna let that story percolate a little while before we come back to that. Maybe next week. I want to touch back on that because that's I don't.
And this has been going on for a while.
Yeah,
but he's finally indicted.
Yeah, that story broke a few weeks ago or a couple weeks ago, but now the indictments came down.
He went old school with that. He went like, I'm going to do, 1950s.
I love it. Old school crime.
Old school bribery.
Old school bribery.
I want gold.
Well, I think when they taught, like the FBI or I don't know if it was sheriffs or FBI or whoever tossed his house, they raided his house, and I think they found just like tons of gold bars.
Oh, yeah, just gold bars and jacket pockets.
Yeah, and I think like a couple like high-end sports cars and just all kinds, just the old school bribery. Last House news, speaker update. So that there's no House Speaker. Steve Scalise of Louisiana was nominated, but then he withdrew his nomination as of like 2 hours ago.
Okay.
Because Jim Jordan, I guess, I think he's of Ohio. I don't know. Jim Jordan, conservative Republican, he also has his hat in the ring, and Scalise withdrew his nomination because he knew he didn't have the votes. As of yet, there's still no House Speaker, and there's no vote called for it. And at this point, it's looking like it might be Jim Jordan. I don't know. He's a little farther to the right than McCarthy, so maybe he'll have the support of kind of the Gates crowd. I'm not really sure. But this is gonna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I know that Steve Scalise was. Matt Gates put him forward when he had the idea. It's like, oh, who would you put forward? When the press asked him, he was like, oh, somebody like Steve Scalise.
Right. All of this kind of actually does tie into Israel-Palestine because there's no House Speaker, so there's nothing being pushed through, which means there's no immediate aid or intervention to Israel.
Yes.
So this has an unforeseen consequence of like no immediate U.S. intervention on behalf of Israel, which if they would they could, and so like the longer there's no House Speaker, the longer there's no immediate aid to.
It's a plus and a minus if they're trying to do some peace talks, which I doubt they're going to be doing peace talks with the U.S. and everything. But the U.S. could help out, which but there probably isn't going to be peace talks. So it's better that the U.S. stays out of this in general, because last thing we need is U.S. armed forces and U.S. extra U.S. weapons and ships being sent.
Well, there already have been ships being sent in. There are I don't know if it's warships or battleships, whatever. There are U.S. military assets off the.
But we can't have a declaration of war without.
Yeah, they're just kind of acting as a bodyguard,
basically,
right?
Or intimidation factors.
There is some military intervention in the Mediterranean currently. As I understand it right now, it's just kind of acting as like a bodyguard situation of just kind of keeping would-be Arab intervention at bay, or as like kind of a bulwark just against anyone that might have the idea or inclination to kind of lend aid. So, okay, well, are we ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's go.
Before we even begin this discussion, I have some distinctions and definitions. I wrote distinctions and definitions up top. I want to make it very clear to anybody listening that's not like as familiar with this as maybe we are.
Yeah. That
there are some distinctions we need to make. And the first is Zionism versus Judaism, or the distinction between Zionism and Judaism. First off, if you've heard just Judaism in general, the Jewish faith, it's a monotheistic religion, Abrahamic religion, one of the world's oldest religions, not unlike Christianity, although there's some obvious and very distinct differences. That is not to be confused with Zionism. Zionism in particular is Jewish nationalism, the idea that Jewish people need to secure their own homeland, their own like governmental state, a Jewish state. Now that has been established since the 1940s, Jewish Zionism has now kind of moved on to, instead of establishing a state, growing and protecting and further establishing and further defending that state.
Yes.
The problem is that Zionism kind of comes in a negative, which on its face isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of problems with Zionism, but the problem is that it's at the expense of other nations, right? So securing and protecting a Jewish homeland at the expense of any neighbors or any existing peoples, which we're going to discuss.
Yeah, the problem is, like, you can have something, which, I mean, it's, how do I put this? It's understandable that the Jews in general would have something such as Zionism because of all the crap that's happened to them in the past.
Perfectly understandable.
1,000 years in Europe with barbaric practices happening to them, the hatred, whether it be the Germans, the French, the Russians. It makes sense. I think the first Zionist councils took place in Basel in 1897 or something like that.
Yeah, the late 1800s. So,
yes.
And the only reason I want to very clearly make that distinction between the religion of Judaism versus the nationalistic ideology of Zionism is because being anti-Zionist, being against that idea of a Jewish homeland at the expense of others, is not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Jewish. It's not being against Jewish people.
100%.
We are in no way, as we go through this discussion, we just want to make it very clear, we are not anti-Semitic. We are not anti-Jewish. That is the opposite of communism. That is...
I mean, Karl Marx was a Jew, was he not?
He was, yeah. Accepting others, accepting everyone as they are, or rather excluding others based on aspects they can't change is fascism. So that would be very fascist, which is the root opposite, the diametric opposite of communism. So.
Let me give an excellent example of what we're trying to say. I grew up Muslim. I guess I'm Muslim by association now. I'm just not very religious. I hate Saudi Arabia. I hate the government. I don't hate the Saudi Arabian people. I hate the government of Saudi Arabia because they are... Everybody with me? Basically, hyper-religious people. They're theocratic. I am against theocracy. And so the same way with Israel, I am not against Judaism. I'm not against Jewish people. I'm not even against Israeli citizens, to a certain extent, unless they're extreme nationalists.
And we're going to talk about that. And literally, what's the next bullet point?
Israel versus Israelis.
Israel versus Israelis. So we're going to be discussing the state of Israel quite a bit, probably for the next 30 minutes or so. And when we say Israel did this, or we don't like Israel doing this, we are referring to the entity, the state of Israel, the Israeli government.
Yes.
As an entity, not as an individual. I do know some Israelis. I know individual Israelis. I know quite a few Jewish people. One of my best friends, known him since the 4th grade, is Jewish. He's been to Israel at least a couple times. I've met friends he's brought back, whatever. Israel is not the same as Israeli. So when we are criticizing Israel, we are not criticizing all Israelis. Now, there will be some Israeli people that we will talk about in general as being less than
ideal.
Good. Yeah, less than ideal, but that's
I will
criticize.
I'll criticize Israelis if they are for what the Israeli government is doing currently.
Sure. So, and we're going to get into a lot of specifics later, but let's back it up. Let's go through a little ancient history. There's a world history lesson with Mr. McClary here. So, ancient history, 3,000 years ago. We're going way back. I went deep with the intro. But let's get in this little time machine. Let's go back to about 3,000 years ago, give or take. Not quite 3,000, a little less than, like 2,950 to be exact, give or take. Give or take. That's something I just said. There were two kingdoms: Kingdom of Judah and Kingdom of Israel. They were in what is modern-day Palestine, stacked on top of each other. The northern half, I believe, was the Kingdom of Judah. The southern half was Israel. Maybe I have those backwards. They were two separate kingdoms of the Hebrew people, what we'd call Jewish people now. They were conquered many times over. This is an area of the world where the first empires were rising and falling, especially at this time, about 1,000, give or take, BCE up until present day, 3,000 years ago.
It is a transitional part of the area.
They were conquered by the Assyrians and then enslaved and massacred and sold into slavery and enslaved. They were conquered by the Babylonians, who took over after the Assyrians, and enslaved and massacred. Then they were taken over by the Persians, who actually returned them all from their Assyrian and Babylonian slaves when they were in Assyria and Babylon. The Persians were actually very accepting of multiculturals, and they
were monotheistic themselves.
They were Zoroastrians, yeah, and so they then conquered what is modern day Palestine and the whole region, and then they actually gave all of the Jewish people safe return back to the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. So there they lived for a decent amount of time until the Romans were the next and final empire to conquer the region. And they had a similar, they actually let them live peacefully so long as they paid taxes and were Roman. And then the Jews denied that. They said no, and they actually rebelled. And then Romans came, and I don't know how many times they sacked, or they came to like quash Jewish rebellions against the Roman Empire. But on the last time, the Romans had enough of this upstart little kingdom, and they sacked the Temple of Jerusalem. They burned everything down. They sold everyone into slavery. That was about 69, 70 A.D., so about 2,000 years ago. That was the last time Jewish people lived in Jewish land that we would now call Israel/Palestine.
Yeah.
2,000 years ago was the last time they could like legitimately hold claim that was their kingdom. From 2,000 years, for the last 2,000 years and on, so then Christians became the dominant religion in Rome after the Romans crucified Jesus. They were polytheistic, then they became monotheistic around the 300-400s AD, CE.
Eastern Roman Empire basically declaring Constantinople.
Exactly. So we all know that, and then those kind of fell to so for a large part of its history, it was both a mix of Muslim and Christians living in the area. The Muslims came online around 600s. That's when Muhammad the Prophet invented the religion of Islam, took over. They took over the whole world, basically. And then it was largely Muslim at that point. Became the location for crusades for a couple hundred years, from the 11th to the 13th century. Christians in Europe wanted to take the Holy Lands back from the Muslims. That had to varying degrees of success. Still, all the while, largely Muslim.
Also, the Crusades were disgusting, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I debated going into like deeper detail, but we don't have the time, and it's just if you're interested, terrible time in history. But look it up on your own time. Then changed hands a couple more times. The Mongol Empire took over but that only lasted for like 80 years or so. And then some different sultanates kind of controlled it, and then Ottoman Empire in the early 1500s controlled it until what we'd consider the modern day, actually around World War I. So the Ottoman Empire, largely Muslim. And it's really important to note that at this point in time, under the Ottoman Empire, it was incredibly peaceful. All three religions, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, shared Jerusalem equally with no complaints. It was still about 85-90% Muslim. Outside of Jerusalem, Jerusalem was about split 33. Everyone lived, and they all shared Jerusalem. They all had, because the Muslims built some holy sites here. It was kind of the birthplace of Christianity and a birthplace of a lot of Judaism. So like it's a combined three-tiered religious holy site. So all religions want it as their kind of holy site, and not for nothing, but when it was under Muslim control, it was worked out peacefully. It wasn't until it was no longer under Muslim control that things began to kind of go sour, which is kind of where we're at now. But now I'm going to just blow through some early 20th century history. 1915, England promises Palestine a home. Yes. They will say that when the Ottoman Empire falls, we will give you your land.
Well, technically, they promised some guy in what is now Saudi Arabia that there's going to be a combined Arabia and that Palestine will have like their own region.
Yeah, it was more complicated than that, but I quickly paraphrase it all. Yes. And then, so at the same time, England is kind of doing some shady business right now. They're writing letters to, I guess what would be called a Saudi now. Something Hussein was his name, promising Palestine a home.
Yes.
At the same time, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They're promising European powers that when the Ottoman Empire falls, they're going to carve it up among France, Russia, Italy, and England, and not give any land to the Palestine, to any Middle Eastern people. The Europeans are going to carve it up and take it, much like they did. Yeah, England, France, Russia, and Italy are going to carve it up and take it, just like they did Africa, just completely colonize it. At the same time, they also make a public declaration, the Balfour Declaration, that they're going to give Jewish people a homeland. So in the span of 3 years, England has promised that land to 3 different people.
Yes.
The Arabs, the Jews, and the Europeans.
And for context, what they promised the Arabs is if they basically riot up and have like their own mini Arab revolution against the Ottomans, because this is in the time of World War I, where the Ottomans were part of the Axis, so-called Axis.
Yeah. Oh, that's important to know. I should mention that. Yeah, the Ottoman Empire fought for Germany, the Central Powers. Then we're called Axis in World War I. That was World War II.
But anyways, basically they offered if the Arabs would revolt against the Ottomans, that they promised them their land, right? And so they did this, and later on, as we're going on with the Balfour Declaration, they also then promised the Jewish people land, right? And then they made a Sykes-Picot agreement, agreeing how to split up land that they offered both of these people amongst themselves. Now, one thing I found recently, in 1917, when the Russian Revolution happened, Lenin actually basically did a leak and basically told everybody, all the Arabs, that, hey, we have a Sykes-Picot agreement. You're not getting anything.
Yeah.
And that caused, like, mass hysteria.
Okay.
Yes. So I thought that was crazy that nobody talks about that.
I haven't heard about that.
I literally just I was reading into it today, and basically, yeah, Lenin comes out after the Russian Revolution because remember, in 1917, World War I was still going on when they took over.
Yeah.
And so basically he leaks the information, and we could just say that it was chaos.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I wanted to correct my statement. It's not Lenin. It's actually Trotsky out of all people. So yeah, do what you want with that.
So over the next 30 years, more and more Jewish people are moving to this region just to kind of be in their homeland. Now that picks up dramatically in 1933. A lot of the Jewish people in Germany, as we know, there's a lot of Jewish anti-Semitism happening in Europe at the time, particularly in Germany. Obviously, the Holocaust, World War II is about to happen, but this is about 10 years or so before that. A lot of Jews are starting to kind of migrate away from Europe into this region. And so now the population is starting to be more about 50-50. There's still less Jews than there are Muslims in the region in the 40s, but there's
still like 30%. I think.
Yeah, no, I mean it ended up being like I think I have the stat here. It's about 30. Yeah, you're right, exactly right. About a third of the population. So in 1947, the United Nations, after World War II, proposes a two-state solution. They say we want to split the land among the Jewish and Palestinians, but we want to give 60% of the land, make it Israel, and 40% of the land make it Palestine, even though the Jews only had about a third of the population. So the Palestinians said no. That was like an offer presented to them, and the Palestinians actually rejected that offer. And after that, then Israel declared itself its own state. And so instead of having this two-state, Israel just said, well, fine, then we'll take it all. We'll declare this whole land of Israel, and then they went to war. War broke out. I don't want to make it sound like Israel just invaded, but war broke out between the what was Israel, and then the Arab League, which was Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. All of those countries kind of invaded the regions to establish an independent Palestine, but actually the underdog Israel defeats them. Israel takes most of that land. About 750,000 Palestinians are expelled in what was called Al-Nakba. I think I'm pronouncing that right, it literally translates to the catastrophe.
Yeah.
A few years later, another war breaks out, the Six-Day War. Another Israel victory, and then they take even more land. This time they take all the Sinai land north of Egypt.
Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights.
And they take the Golan Heights in Lebanon, and then a couple years later they'll give that land back in a peace treaty with Egypt.
Yeah.
They'll give the Egyptian, the Sinai region back to Egypt. But at this point, they have taken over the entirety of what we would now call like Israel as a country, and there's a small section at Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and then there's a small area in the West Bank where any remaining Palestinians were kind of herded and forced into. Yeah. So this was in the 60s and 70s. So over from 1948, for when war eventually breaks out, to now in the 60s, early 70s, the Palestinian land has shrunk down to just those two main regions, when 20 years before that, it was the entire country.
Yeah.
So when people say that it's just like, oh, they're both there and we don't know what to do about it, they weren't both there. It was a Palestinian country for literally 2,000 years. It was an Arab country with 90%-ish population of Muslim people, Arab people. It has only very recently been taken over, squatters by
basically
what is now Israel.
Yeah, you have to remember that, like, you as an Arab can be a Jew, you can be a Christian.
I was saying Muslim, but I actually wanted to correct myself. When I say Muslim, I don't mean Muslims. I want to say, I should correct myself and just say Arabs or indigenous Arab people to that land.
Yeah, you have to remember that majority of the Jewish people that live and settle there now, they are They're white. They're from Poland. They are from Russia. They're from Germany.
So that's kind of the whole crux of. I think we kind of skipped over this problem of, it's this idea of all Jews have this right to kind of this right of return where they can just move to Israel and just claim a house. But what most people aren't aware of or don't care of is that there's a Palestinian family living in the house. They're bulldozing these houses down. Build a Remax, I believe, is like the American real estate company, is the one building these houses back up and then is selling them to New York, Philadelphia, whoever, Americans or Europeans, mostly American and Europeans.
It's another capitalist problem.
At really cheap prices, because they're these cookie cutter condos in what was formerly a Palestinian's home. So they're being kicked out of their homes, and that's I would say the lucky ones, because now if we move on to what's actually happening to these people that have been pushed further and further into Gaza Strip, pushed into the West Bank. It is an open air prison, 2.4 million people living in something the size of a relatively small U.S. city. Lack of water, lack of electricity.
It's like something like 90% or plus is like of water.
It's undrinkable. Poisonous. I think 50+% unemployment. So everyone's living below the poverty line. It is literally what we would, when I say ghetto, I don't mean like the racist American term of ghetto. I mean like an actual like a European World War II era like ghetto. They're walled in, they're fenced in, they've been corralled, and they are just being bombed, left to starve, left to die of thirst,
which is just inhumane, and it's
it is a little war crime. But what the argument against it not being a war crime is? Because Palestine isn't a state, therefore it's not a war crime. That's Israel's defense, is that because Palestine isn't a recognized state, it can't be a war crime, I think is what I read. Like, that's how it can't be like acts of war, basically.
Then we can flip that real quick. There was no Jewish state in Europe, so was Hitler really making a war crime?
Yeah. So
it's just like that. I mean, you can't say something against like an entire ethnicity of people, and it can't be a war crime, because you could literally flip it on them. What happened, like less than 100 years ago? They didn't have a state, so was it war crime?
Yeah, so and it's also worth noting, I have here that all violence against Jews, not all violence, but most violence against Jewish people throughout history, from beginning to current day, is committed by Christians and non-Muslim and non-Arab communities.
Yeah, for the most part.
You're looking at all of the Jewish pogroms in Russia throughout like the mid to like late, or the 17, 18, 1900s, Russian Orthodox Christians, the Catholics, Crusades, Germans in the Holocaust. And I also made a note here that not only did Jewish people live happily in the Palestinian land under Ottoman Empire control, also in all of the Muslim caliphates throughout Western Europe, Spain in particular, there was completely accepted. There are so many Sephardic Jews that lived among the Muslims in Spain, that when
it's against the religion to touch them for their religion.
So when the Catholics took that land back in those wars in the early or late 1400s, in 1492, the Catholics took over that Iberian Peninsula and they kicked all the Jews out. It was the 1492 expulsion. So like it's always been Catholics or Christians that have like. And I don't know, this is neither here nor there. This isn't really that important of a point where it's relevant to this, but I just thought it was very interesting to worth note that like Muslims are not the enemy of Jews. And if anyone tells you that this is like a religious war, they're being insincere and kind of not totally faithful to the actual truth, because it has nothing to do with ideology or theology. It's just about land. It's just about the land of Palestine. Anyway, fun fact about the whole Sephardic expulsion of 1492. That was 1492 might sound familiar, because that's when a lot of these voyages to the New World was happening. So they were all kicked out of Spain at that time. So a lot of those Sephardic Jews were on those boats coming to the New World at that time. If you do blood tests on like indigenous people or Mexican people or like South American people, there's like a vast majority of them that have Sephardic Jew in their bloodlines.
I'm not surprised.
Interesting fun fact about history is there's a lot of Sephardic Jew blood in South Americans and Central Americans, because of at that time they had to get out of, because they were being murdered. They had to get out of Spain fast, and the only boat in town was heading to the Bahamas or Brazil or whatever. So
and a lot of them actually migrated back to what is now Israel, actually.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of them went to Bosnia. I think the largest population of Jews in Bosnia are Sephardic Jews.
Not Ashkenazi?
No, I don't think so.
Interesting.
Ashkenazi are more like Northern Europe.
Yeah, that's fair. So if anyone unfamiliar, that's the Poland and
Eastern Europe.
Yeah, Eastern Europe. If anyone's unfamiliar, there's different like I don't actually know the distinction. What you would call that is it's almost like a Sunni and a Shiite Muslim. It's like a different. I don't know where it splits in history. I'd actually have to go back and find out where that diverges. That line.
I think it was. I would be talking out of my ass, but I think it was a thought, a different ideology, but it turned into certain groups of people believe those ideologies, and then it became different ethnicities in a sense.
Okay.
Kind of like if Iraq was Sunni and Iran was Shia, and then over 1,000 years, they stayed like that. So you would associate Shia Muslims to be Persian, and so I know a lot of Sephardic Jews are from Northern Africa. A lot of Sephardic Jews are from Spain, and then a lot of Sephardic Jews are from I think like Libya and even like most of Western Africa back over there because of like the migration.
Sure. Yeah, imagine if you couldn't get on a ship to the New World. Maybe you were fleeing south to Northern Africa and Western Africa. I don't know. I would have to kind of look into the Jewish diaspora of the Sephardic Jewish diaspora. I would be very interesting. Here's a promise. I'll have a little retraction update. Beep, 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 beep. Breaking news update. At the top of the next episode, I'll bring an update for where the Ashkenazi Sephardic timeline diverges.
That would be great. I would love that. That's great.
Just because I was about to say historian. I'm not a historian. I'm a history teacher, but I wouldn't consider myself a historian.
You're a historian.
Am I a historian?
I mean, you're not a historian in the sense that you get paid to...
I get paid to teach history.
You're a historian.
Yeah,
in my opinion, you're a historian.
I have a history degree.
You're an historian in the educational sense.
So that was a nice little breakup because I was getting a little heated. So I wanted to talk about the 1492 expulsion of Jews from I forget what that was called, the Declaration. It doesn't matter. But
the Inquisition?
No, it was like the Bonma agreement, something. It doesn't matter. I was getting a little heated because it is frustrating to see like very disingenuous takes. It's the both sides. It's the this is a complex issue. There's whatever on both sides. It's like, no, it's actually a pretty simple issue, and it's not really both sides. You have an oppressor and an oppressed. You have an enslaved population. I don't want to use the term enslaved, but you have a very marginalized, oppressed, brutally attacked, murdered, beaten,
second-class citizen.
You have it's an apartheid, genocidal, fascist state, and one side is being systematically murdered and exterminated.
The irony.
And you have the powerful elite that are committing these atrocities. It's not a both sides thing. It's a very one-sided thing. And so you have a lot of, I think, like liberals and elites, and I'm seeing so many like celebrities that I follow on Instagram come out and like just be like, this whole both sides, we have to condemn violence on both sides. If you are doing that to if you are an oppressor that is forced people into an open-air prison, walled them in, cut off their food, water, access to jobs, bombing them, murdering them, beating them. If they fight back eventually, that's acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to like mince words, and I don't want to say that like murdering civilian women and children is acceptable and it's all good, but like this is the natural response to a people that have been pushed to the edge, and that's not.
This is what I tell people.
Surprising.
It's like I condemn, what Hamas has done with like murdering innocent people. But my quote is, what did you expect to happen? They had no other medium of resistance. You destroyed early on their communist and socialist parties, and the only thing that was literally left was the nationalist party. So that's literally all they have left. And it's not like a majority of Palestinians agree with Hamas. They don't agree with Hamas, but it's the only outlet they have.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing so much of this. Hamas is this terrorist group that has to be completely denounced, and it's like Hamas is a militant group defending its people. I'm not going to like jump to and defend Hamas like 100%, but all I'm saying is that it's very
Hamas
easy to
exists
understand
because of Israel.
Yeah, it's a natural response to the treatment. It's not a surprise. It's not in any. It's not like I'm just dumbfounded by all of these responses of like this independent terrorist organization showed up out of nowhere and just bombed Israel. And it's like that lacks all understanding of the material conditions over the past 75 years, 48 to 75 years exactly. This is the 75th anniversary of Israel, quote unquote Israel. if you've treated people like that for 75 years, I am surprised. I mean, and there has been incursions, and there has been like conflicts multiple times over 2014, 2008, 90s. I mean, this is an ongoing conflict, but this is kind of, I think, reached a certain boiling point that is in no way so surprising. And it's not just the both sidesing. It's not just the Hamas is a terrorist group. It's also just all of the misinformation that they're beheading babies, that they kidnapped all these people and just executed them all.
I mean, it's like, classic.
And
I feel like a lot of this misinformation the Nazis did with the Jews. The Jews drink blood of children. Yeah. The Jews this. The Jews
also,
that.
I mean, you saw this with Saudi Arabia. Or I'm sorry. Was it? Yeah, no, Iraq with just all of the rapes they were doing, and then Gaddafi's boner. Oh no, Gaddafi giving all of his soldiers Vicodin so they could rape longer, and then all just like the incubator. I forget what all these rumors that start up anytime there's a Middle Eastern leader that, and not to defend Hussein, but anytime there's a Middle Eastern leader like Gaddafi, there's just this immediately these stories start coming out of you have to just dehumanize them. I mean, even I don't think it was Netanyahu, but it was a defense minister of Israel called them savages or animals, and that they must be exterminated as such.
Yes, he said that. Marco Rubio said that they must be. Did you not hear that? I mean, that blew my mind when I heard Marco Rubio call for the genocide. Open on live TV, called for genocide of Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean he's a fascist, a hard right fascist. Conservative Republican.
But called for open genocide, literally in those words, essentially, would they need to be wiped off the planet? Like what the fuck?
So that actually brings us to, where does it go from here, right? Because we know that Israel has already amassed, I think the last quote I saw was about 300,000 troops. They pulled up all the reserve, IDF forces to start pushing in or amassing on the borders of the Gaza Strip. We have American military assets moving in. So, let me rephrase this. Is there any outcome that doesn't result in the complete extermination of all Palestinian people? I know that there's a lot. I'm listening to a lot of podcasts on all the outlets, and they're all saying this is the time we're seeing actual resistance. This is what revolution looks like. And I'm just thinking, knowing how brutally
you're fighting an oppressive government with sticks and shit. You're this is. I mean, listen. I think this is the problem with nationalism. Zionism, when it began as a defense of the Israeli people, and you have to understand that the power complex back when Zionism began in the late 1800s, or at least when it was established as a real thing. They were on the other. The other crutch of power. They did not have any power. They did not have the weapons. They did not have any. Basically, they were on the other end of the stick, right? And now that they have become the power, that they have now full control over everything they want, they abuse that same power. So it's just nationalism. The only way to get rid of that nationalism is if the actual Israeli people that are against this stand up and say enough is enough.
And it's worth noting that there are quite a few
there's
Israelis that have come out very outspoken against the Israeli government. There's been a lot of movements. There's been some Jewish groups in New York burning the flags of Israel in protest of the Israeli treatment of Palestinians. So it goes back to what we said up top. The difference between Israel and Israeli is that there are a lot of Israelis that are very much on the side of, or if not on the side of, the Palestine cause, at least very aware of Israel's shortcomings in this situation.
But what can they do? They're scared. But at the same time, it's just the real the person, or not the person, but the people with the actual power in their hands are gonna be at the end of the day the Israelis, because Israel's not going to stop. The state of Israel's not going to stop. Western powers haven't done shit. If another country invades Iran or any other Arab or Muslim country to defend, it's going to cause a world war.
So that's the other option. The way I see it, and from kind of this, I tried to stay away from a lot of other leftist outlets talking about this, because I didn't want it to kind of taint my takes, for instance. But for example, the one thing I did listen to, and it was Rev Left Radio. Shout out to Rev Left. They released an episode today or yesterday talking about this, and it was very. He didn't mention the outcome he mentioned was World War, right? Because at this point, to avoid like all out, extermination of the Palestinian people, you would need some kind of aid, right? So either Egyptians, Syrians.
Egyptians are new shit.
Yeah, I mean Egyptians
are new shit.
Yeah, but like Jordanians, Lebanese, Syrians, some other neighboring Arab power to come to the defense. And then what that brings is exactly what we saw in World War I, which is like when you have one, there's just a web of peace treaties and military alliances that come from all these countries, and that results in what could potentially be World War III. So your options are, and this is a very cynical take, but your options are either you get aid from neighboring Arab countries, which sparks World War III, or you get the complete crushing and potential genocide of the Palestinian people.
Or we somehow persuade the UN or something to step in, some sort of intervention. I don't think they'll be absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think there will be intervention from some third party before that happens. But I mean, what we know about like Rwanda, what we know about every other like,
I think this will be the end of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good thing, is to dismantle that and like. Are you saying in terms of like destruction, or in terms of
I'm
like?
talking about the destruction.
Oh, okay.
If you see what a lot of Israelis are posting out there and what they want done, I saw a video of a guy basically. This is Gaza, and then this is what Gaza is going to be, or what it should be, and there's just nothing there. This flat like cement.
I mean, there's
and
a
then
lot
Israeli settlements built upon that.
I mean, should we pull up a map here? Just like I pulled up a map earlier, just quickly. I don't know. I searched Egypt.
So what I think is going to happen is Israel's going to invade Gaza Strip. And when they invade the Gaza Strip, they're gonna, claim for, terroristic purposes that, because of terrorists, they need to come in and handle the situation.
So if you're looking here, I mean, this is Israel, right? Palestine. This right here, this little strip of land is where you have 2.2, I forget if it's 2.2 or 2.4 million Palestinians living between here and then here in the West Bank. This at one point was all Palestinian land, and then over since 48 to present, it's been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and now this Gaza Strip is what is essentially an open-air prison that's walled in, blockaded by Israeli, and blockaded by Egyptians.
That's why I say Egypt's not going to do shit, because Egypt doesn't want the refugees to come into Egypt, right? They already have their own problems, but I mean, to be honest, to the Egyptian government, you're a bunch of pussies. That's all I gotta say right now.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate to see like them just completely leaving their Arab comrades in the lurch, right? Like that's pretty shitty.
It's very shitty.
And I mean, I can't speak on behalf of a government that I am not ethnically tied to, or I mean, I can't tell the Egyptians what to do, but I mean, just as an outside perspective, seeing like what would be considered, ethnically your brothers be treated like this. I mean, I couldn't imagine like just standing by and doing nothing. Obviously, they have to worry about the welfare of their people. They have to worry about the, not provoking war. They lost a war against Israel before. I mean,
anything they do will provoke a war. Yeah. That's the thing. So they're going to stay silent because they've already basically received the silent treatment. But they've already tried multiple times. Saudi Arabia is he's literally allies with Israel. Saudi Arabia is literal allies with Israel, and so they're allies with America as well. Iraq doesn't have like the necessary backing.
Yeah.
Syria is like literally broken apart, chaos. Lebanon, the only thing that could happen is like these are like a few things that could happen. Iran could supply massive amount of weapons. I mean, Iran tanks, weapons.
Yeah.
They could give. So what happened with ISIS was their militias fighting. Private militias are not associated with the government fighting ISIS in Iraq, and all the vast majority of those weapons and recruitment was done by Iran. So literally, Iran came in. It's like, okay, we will dismantle ISIS. Basically, they gave weapons to Iraqi militias and such, and they fought with all those weapons and with basically training from Iran. They fought ISIS. A lot of things can be done the same way. Maybe private militias from Jordan or from Iraq literally go in as like jihad. I mean, that's not a good thing, but I'm like, what I'm saying, what could happen, or Hezbollah might get involved.
Yeah, we know a couple of the myths, because you mentioned ISIS. I just want to there's been some news stories, much like the beheaded babies, that like ISIS was behind the initial Hamas attack, that initial incursion, for lack of a better term. That's obviously been debunked already. There's no ISIS involvement inside the Gaza Strip.
ISIS is gone.
Yeah,
gone.
Well, there was there was a flag. They found a couple flags in some place somewhere, but like as far as I understood, the news reports were that was an Israeli soldier that original report came from, and it's like it was very obviously planted. The beheaded baby story was from one journalist that claimed that they saw it, but then they later claimed that it was a soldier that said they saw it, and then it was later investigated to be found false. But also Biden said that he saw photos of beheaded babies, and then they had to retract that. So now Biden is jumping on this bullshit of like, yeah, Biden came out and said, I saw photos of beheaded babies, and then like a few hours later had to issue the White House Twitter account or something issued a correction. It was like, well, he didn't actually see it. He was told about it.
Do you see that Ben Shapiro tweet?
No.
Ben Shapiro.
I'm not on Twitter for one, and I definitely avoid Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, but it's kind of hard when you're into politics.
If I were on Twitter, I would probably monitor these people more, but I'm not.
So Ben Shapiro basically tweeted out a picture of a baby that's burnt to a crisp, supposed baby that's burnt to a crisp, and like, oh look, you wanted photo evidence. Here's your photo evidence of it happening.
Was it a Gazan or a Palestinian?
Somebody retweeted. They did some searches. This is an AI image.
Yeah.
So it's literally a fake image.
Yeah, the one debunk quick story I saw was it was a couple children in like very small cages, and it was like, this is what Palestinians are doing to Israeli children. I think that was BBC World News released that, and then they released a correction like an hour later saying, nope, this is actually Palestinian children in Israeli cages.
Yes. So that's what Western media will do.
Yeah.
That Israel has the backing of Western media. Israel has the backing of America. Israel has the backing of a multitude of like the most high-tech weapons on Earth. To the point where a lot of people are using Israel's like style of like spyware and weapon technology to do their own thing. So, and then Palestinians have rocks, and then house-made rockets. And it's just, and at the end of the day, it's just like there's an outcry of like, what? Oh, Hamas this, Hamas that. I'm like, you realize like you're poking a bear, stabbing a bear over and over again, and the bear had enough and it swipes once at the person, and then suddenly the bear is the victim.
A couple other points I want to make real quick too is there was another story I saw that was like that Hamas hostages that they took, they were going to execute and the news article phrased this as such, that Hamas would execute hostages if Israel were to bomb, or if they were to be bombed by Israel. But what they left out of that was what the demand was from Hamas was that we'll execute Israeli hostages if Israel bombs civilian targets with women and children. So that wasn't like, it's such a regular occurrence that Israel bombs civilian targets with women and children that in order to prevent that, Hamas took hostages just to prevent women and children from being bombed. So like it was framed as if they were just going to like, they took hostages, civilian hostages, and then in the course of war there are bombings, so it was just a way to guarantee just murdering civilian hostages. But what the actual thing was to prevent women and children from being bombed. And the reason I bring this up, and the reason I'm like putting this a point of it, is there was a video released, I think today, of one of those hostages, and it was actually translated with the Arabic, and that what it was saying, it was like, you won't be harmed, like, we've shown mercy or whatever. And it was like they're talking to these Israeli hostages like they're not going to harm them. And I don't know why that's all that important, except to say that like the power balance, the difference in power balance is just insane. Where like they're literally taking these hostages just to prevent their women and children from being bombed as like insurance against that, not for some nefarious, we're just going around beheading Israeli citizens. It's and I don't want to make it sound like I'm condoning the taking of civilian hostages. I'm certainly not, but I just want to make it clear that like this is what you get if you're forced to protect your people. If this is an avenue that's open to you in a way you can protect your people, it's very easy to understand how you would come to that conclusion and make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, it is like you said. It's all about the power difference. We're talking about a high-tech military versus sticks and stones with some guns and some homemade rockets. They're going to do whatever they're going to need to do to make sure that the best outcome comes from this. Again, civilian casualties are not okay. Civilian casualties are going to happen. We don't, condone civilian casualties. But at the end of the day, what did you expect to happen?
Yeah.
What did you expect to happen? What other outlet do they give them? An outlet to express their emotion, give them an outlet to have changes. But the entire life of people in Gaza, Palestinians in general, is controlled 100%. Whatever work they have in Gaza is from Israeli-owned companies.
Yep.
Whatever water they have
unless
is
they
poisoned.
have like some kind of small shop or something. But that's
It's
that's
like a family shop.
Yeah.
You know, their water is poisoned. Their electricity is so minimal that like they have constant power outages.
Well, and it's controlled by Israel.
And it's controlled by Israel.
Shut off on it,
so whenever Israel wants, they could just, all right, no more power, no more water. They cement wells, water wells. They pour cement to and this was happening in the West Bank. They're literally pouring cement into wells so they wouldn't have a water source, so they would have to be forced to move away.
Yeah.
You're causing humanitarian problems, and you're committing war crimes, and then when something happens when they're fighting back, you're like, look at this, look what they're doing, look what they did to 10 people, and then you bring up the statistics. Is like, you just murdered 10,000 people in the past 10 years, and then 5 people get bombed from some 3 psychopaths that shot out a missile because they're probably part of ISIS in the first place. And then what are we gonna do? Bomb innocent children and women.
Yeah, and there's a lot we didn't touch on too. There was because we're kind of at time here or getting close to it. There was some other things that were worth mentioning briefly. Are the this weird issue with how liberals can justify war in Ukraine but condemn this war so you can't be for democracy and the divine or natural rights of people everywhere and condemn this because you're essentially just a contradiction, which we know that's par for the course for liberals. But also to note is look at all of the quote-unquote progressive or leftist or socialist or democratic socialist politicians, AOC, Bernie, all of them have come out in defense of Israel and condemning Palestine or condemning protests in New York. AOC came out criticizing protests, pro-Palestinian protests in New York. It's just been nothing but disappointments from all of the people that will have free Palestine in their Twitter bios, but then when it comes time to actually support Palestine, are nowhere to be found.
Yeah. If they had any balls, they had any pride, or they felt they had any sorts of shame, they would come out properly in support for Palestine.
Yeah.
If you're going to be in support for Palestine, say it and do it. Don't say Palestine on one end and then do the support Israel on the other end.
And that brings me to my final point, which is something I think we should have been doing this whole time, but I definitely want to start doing, which is if you want to know how you can help Palestine, or if you want to know just how you can help in general, whatever city you're in, unless you're in fucking some, bumfuck city somewhere, whatever city you're in, there is a group, a mutual aid group, some kind of organized group doing good work in your city. Find a CPUSA group. Find a PSL group. If it's all you got, join DSA. They're doing some cool stuff in some cities somewhere, I assume. I'm not sure. I've never seen it. But that's just my DSA hate coming through. Find a group. There are rallies for the Palestinian cause. There's actual direct action happening on the streets in your city. You just have to find it. So if you want to come out and show solidarity with Palestinian people, find a group. The easiest thing I would do is find a PSL, the local PSL chapter, follow them on Instagram. They'll post, or find the CPU, your city's CPUSA chapter, follow them on Instagram or Twitter. They'll be posting their flyers about where they're going to meet and rally in your city. So go show some solidarity. That's the least you can do. Join those organizations. Get involved.
Please.
In addition to the Palestinian issue, they're doing good work. I know our CPUSA does a lot of great work for unhoused people in the Seattle area. Your CPUSA, your city, CPUSA, PSL, DSA, whatever, they're doing good work. So go out and join them. All right, I'll step off my soapbox. That's it for me.
No, that's great. We need to be promoting CPUSA and a lot of other organizations more often.
Yeah, I know. It just occurred to me we haven't been doing that. It's in every podcast show notes. I have the Join CPUSA URL in there, and and I call to join, but I haven't been saying it on here. So
I will be posting the site where you can actually join CPUSA in the videos.
So if you want a link, look in the show notes below. Look in the show notes of any of our previous episodes, and the follow link for joining CPUSA is there. I recommend joining your local. If you didn't know, CPUSA is the Communist Party USA. It's the oldest communist party in the United States. Been around since 1919. So get involved. Do some good work with your local Communist Party.
Yes, please.
All right. Well, with that, we done?
Yeah.
I mean, I got a lot more thoughts. There's a lot we could say.
There's a lot going on.
There's so many
guys.
different like avenues. Like I said, the Ukrainian parallels, just the different political parallels to this. We didn't talk about kind of the more. There's just a lot of different aspects we didn't take. And listen. Also, I want to say that like there are other podcasts that have done this history and this conflict and the history of this conflict way better than we could. The Deprogram did an episode about it. I'm pretty sure Rev Left Radio has did an episode about it. Red Menace did an episode about it. Cocktails and Capitalism, I think is what they're called. I think they're a little bit of a newer one. They did like a multi-part series about this. I think every podcast, Turn Leftist just released an episode about this. Literally everyone has done it. So if you want to know more about it, don't take it from us. This was just meant to be more our takes on the current events. If you want to learn more about like the detailed history of it, first of all, crack a book, you dumb son of a bitch, and then. Apart from that, go listen to the podcast.
Yes. Also, a decent. I mean, depending how you like to learn. I know Hassanabi also has a really good video on YouTube right now. It's an hour long. Israel-Gaza conflict.
He's been streaming like nonstop, really coming out swinging and
hell yeah,
pro-Palestinian cause. I saw a really cool clip from a friend of mine posted on Instagram today, so that was awesome to see. Absolutely,
and he also it was just today. As for the leftovers today on H3, they had like a whole debate going on about like how we should be looking at this and how it should be approached.
Yeah.
So go take a look at that.
The point to all of this is be informed. Just get a lot of different sources, not just us and not just your mom or your dad's Fox News channel or whatever. Yeah. Like if you hear anything that sounds wild and like, damn, that's some crazy shit that Hamas is doing, then it's probably untrue. So like just do better. Just debunk lies and just do your best out there.
Yes, exactly. And just turn off the TV.
Turn off the TV a little bit.
Turn off the TV.
Turn on Revolutionary Rhetoric Podcast.
There we go.
All right, well, email us. Email in. You can find us revolutionaryrhetoric@gmail.com.
Yes.
Follow us on Instagram, Revolutionary Rhetoric on Instagram, Rev Rhetoric Pod.
Yes, Rev Rhetoric Pod on Twitter. We are Revolutionary Rhetoric on TikTok.
TikTok, yeah.
Yes, and I think that's about it, right?
Yeah, email us, comment on.
Should we make a Facebook? Get all those crazy old people.
Make a Facebook group, like a community group or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not on Facebook anymore.
I'm not I have it, but
I don't want to go back to Facebook.
I don't know. It's a bunch of old people.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like the people on my Facebook. I don't want to deal with my family. No. But 100%. Give us a follow. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you've made it this far on YouTube, an hour in, 59 minutes in, thanks so much. Give us a like, comment, share it with your friends.
Subscribe.
Watch
our previous video that I'll be putting up right here.
Okay, you're going to do that thing?
Yeah, why not?
And that little title card above your head.
All right.
Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Peace and love.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.